Okay, we ready, Matt?
Yes.
Okay. All right, good evening. Welcome to the November 15th, 2023 Joint Facilities Advisory Commission meeting. We are holding a virtual meeting today as authorized by legislation adopted by the Virginia General Assembly and consistent with JFAC's electronic meeting policy. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few specifics about how today's meeting will run. Tonight's meeting is being recorded and the recording will be made available on the JFAC website. The meeting is available to stream from the JFAC website via Microsoft Teams link. There is also a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. If commission members, presenters, or speakers lose internet connectivity during today's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you are called upon. Turn off any sound to other devices around you to minimize interference. Please also turn off your video feed. I will address when it is appropriate to turn it on in a moment. When called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located under your meeting command bar. If you're dialing in by phone, press *6 to unmute. For commissioners, if commission members wish to be recognized to speak on an item, please use one of the three following methods to be recognized. Use the raise hand feature within Teams, ask to be recognized using the chat box, turn your video feed on, and leave your microphone muted until you have been recognized. Once you have completed speaking, please turn on your video feed back off. Or once you have completed speaking, please turn your video feed back off. Do we have any commission members who joined us via phone today without the video option?
Looks like no.
Okay. Additional notes for public speakers. We will hold public comment periods at the beginning and the end of the meeting. Those requesting to speak may speak during only one comment period. At that time, I will ask members of the public who wish to be recognized to unmute and state their name. Lastly, this is a public forum. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. Before I get into welcome, introduction, and chair's update, do we have anyone here that would like to speak at public comment? Okay, then let's move on to the welcome and introductions. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us this Wednesday night for this meeting. We have a big turnout, it seems, for us JFAC, which has felt pretty small for the last couple of meetings. We have some new members joining us tonight. And Star, you're going to have to help me pronounce your name. So why don't we kind of go around? So we have two new members, Star and Natalie, and I will let them introduce themselves a little bit more. And then I would like for each member to just quickly, turn your video on and say who you are so that we have an idea who's talking. And we also have a new liaison from the FAC who is, under new guidelines is here, mostly to listen, but will be allowed, will be given opportunities to share the work of FAC with us if there is any work to share. And otherwise is welcome to speak during public comment. But Zach, please introduce yourself as well during this time. So I'll start since I'm on the video. I'm Stacy Snyder. I'm the chair of the JFAC. Wells, why don't you go next?
Hi, everybody. I'm Wells Harrell, and I am the vice chair of JFAC.
Brian?
Hello. Hi, Natalie, and I've already forgotten your name, the new members, but welcome. And I'm Brian Harner. I'm a member of the JFAC.
Claire?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Claire Noakes. I've been a member of JFAC for maybe like 3 years, 4 years, it's hard to know. So very welcome, nice to virtually meet you.
Diana?
Hi, Diana. Relatively new member. I think I joined in February this year, so we can welcome to the committee and we can all learn together.
All right, Star.
Hi everyone, my name is Star Hi, just like hello is how you pronounce it. And I just moved to Arlington a little over a year ago. I'd been overseas, and prior to that, I lived in DC proper for about a decade. So just moved to Arlington and wanted to get involved, and this seemed to be the best committee where that fits my skill set. So just arrived to the committee in September, I believe, and I'm happy to be here. And thank you all very much.
Thank you. Welcome. Natalie. Natalie, you're next on the list.
Yeah, hi. I'm new to JFAC. Happy to be here on the commission, and I'm a Lion Park resident, and that's it. Happy to be with this great group.
Thanks, Natalie. Welcome. All right, Steve Young.
Hey everyone. So I also am a member of JFAC. Welcome to our new members. And I think I'm the longest surviving commissioner on JFAC. I'm in my 7th year now. So anyway, nice to meet our new folks.
All right, thank you. Zach, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Zach Larnard. I am a member of the Facilities Advisory Committee for APS and the liaison to JFAC. So good to see you all again. Sometimes some of you I know already from previous jobs. So happy to be back.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, you were a member of APS staff when I was a member of FAC.
Yeah, I remember way back when Steve started at the same time. So I've been around a bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you and welcome, Zach. Matt and Robert, do you guys want to introduce yourselves as well? They are our staff liaisons.
Sure, thanks. Matt Ladd, staff liaison from the county side and the CPHD, Community Planning, Housing and Development Department. And we had someone who just joined by phone and not sure if that's a JFAC member or not. But if you're a JFAC member, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Andy Greenwood.
Oh, hi, Andy. Yeah, we're introducing ourselves. Yeah, because we have a couple of new members.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
So do you want me, if I understand correctly, I'll introduce myself then.
Yeah, sure.
Andy Greenwood. I was on the FAC with Stacy before I moved to away for when I was on the Coast Guard, and I've since retired, and I have got 2 kids at Gunston and 1 at MPSA.
All right, thank you, Andy.
And hello, everyone. My name is Robert Ruiz. I staff JFAC on behalf of APS.
All right, well, thank you and welcome. I have just a couple of, like a brief update for the group. Yesterday, the county board met, and at their closed meeting, I think that they approved the JFAC charge. In February, we sent them a draft charge, and that made its way through staff on county board side and the school board side, and the school board adopted that charge at a meeting last month, I think, and then the county board followed up and passed it yesterday. So I will, when I get the final version of that charge, I think it's still on its way. I will share that with the group, send it out in a post-meeting email. But that's kind of where we are with the chair's update. Do we have anyone here for public comment? Okay, hearing no, let's move to the minutes from January, February, July, and September. Matt, do we have to approve these separately, or can we approve them approve them all in one vote?
I think you can approve them all in one vote.
Okay.
And maybe just the new members who just joined can abstain because they weren't at any of these meetings.
Okay. Does anyone have any revisions or updates to these minutes? Okay, hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to
I'll go ahead.
approve.
Second.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, minutes pass unanimously. Okay, so let's move on to our next agenda item, which is our main agenda item. Wow, we're really moving through things pretty quickly. You know, I'm sorry that some of you were having trouble getting through the link to the presentation to work. I don't know what was going on with that. It was because I could open it just fine. But there are, but I hope that some of you were able to, you know, actually to view the presentation and to watch the school board and staff discussion about it, because I think it's really helpful, and it is sort of the premise of this meeting, you know, or what we will be discussing this evening. And like the recommendations last time, you know, there are some draft recommendations or feedback slides included on this, but they are there with the intention of creating guidelines for the discussion, and that, you know, they are open to changing and editing and adding and removing items as the discussion dictates. So let's go. Can we go to the next slide, please, Matt? So I wanted to share, I wanted to start the presentation and start the discussion by, because after we sent the last recommendations, and there were some discussions around those recommendations, and Wells and I sent a follow-up email kind of clarifying kind of the fundamentals of where we were coming from with those recommendations from the CIP report. And I found them, I kind of went back and looked at them, and I found them to be very informative and a good framework for how we can look at the CIP direction, and potentially even use the same kind of framework when we get to the CIP decision making in the spring. So I will just read this, and this is, you know, this is how I feel about recommendations, and, you know, Wells and I both wrote this, so it's how we both do. And sort of just to explain to you and to the public and to the boards that we are advising for, this is where I'm coming from with general CIP recommendations. We understand the CIP to be a financial planning document that balances needs and priorities as informed by relevant data, research, and other information provided within the CIP report. The CIP process examines each of the defined and prioritized needs under the parameters of debt service limits, the budget, including impacts of debt service to the operating budget, and timing. This process can and should create a plan that defines affordable and timely solutions for all priorities. Next slide, please. However, to find this balance, context matters. Each project or proposal must be considered in context of other needs, timing, available funding, enrollment projections, and planning for long-range site and facility use. We are now in an environment where opportunity costs may be significant, such that committing to one project prevents moving forward on a future project, even if it is a high priority. As you consider your CIP direction, we encourage you to be clear about what APS's priorities are, how particular capital projects reflect those priorities, and whether there are any trade-offs. So that's sort of where Wells and I are coming from when we're putting this. And please feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions or comments or thoughts. But I just wanted to sort of put that out there and kind of explain this is where we're coming from when we put together this presentation and these recommendations. And that was where we were coming from with the recommendations in September as well. Okay, next slide, please. So I kind of took that premise and put together some guiding questions. So sort of how can we look at this CIP direction and ask, does it create a plan that defines affordable and timely solutions for all priorities? Does it respond to budget parameters? Does it demonstrate an acknowledgement of long-range planning and collaboration between APS and the county? Does it consider each project and proposal in context of other needs, timing, available funding, enrollment projections, and planning for long-range site and facility use? Does it establish a process by which trade-offs are transparently considered? So does anybody have any comments about that? Wells, do you have anything to add, or shall we just keep going?
Yeah, I've got nothing to add, so happy to keep going unless others have questions.
Okay, so so the budget this year, can we go to the next slide, please? So this is from the presentation, the presentation at the school board meeting on November 9th on the information item of the capital improvement plan direction that has been proposed by the, it's basically the superintendent's and staff's capital improvement plan direction, and the school board will vote on it on November 30th, and they can add amendments or change it, or Natalie, do you have a question? I see you are unmuted.
Oh, my bad. Sorry about that.
Okay.
But no, it's great. No.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and I think this is a pretty and this kind of lays the groundwork. If we see the CIP as a financial planning document, you know, what the financial parameters are must be planned within those parameters. And as we, oh, Claire, you have your hand up.
Finish your thought. You're quick on the draw, but you can finish your.
Do you want to go ahead and share your thought, Claire?
Okay, that's fine. I was just going to add a little bit of nuance. Based on my understanding, the current capital reserve balance has already been allocated and committed. Like these funds are not in an account somewhere available. It is technically in the reserve funds, but that this amount has been allocated already. So I just wanted to mention that because it's a little bit confusing the way that they've drafted it in these bullets. And then the 25 million, that is that's like a placeholder that the county bond guy gave to APS, and that could probably be altered either down or up, but it's unlikely to be altered down or up to such a degree, like, you know, it's unlikely to be tripled, for example. So there's a range that it's likely to be. And so I just wanted to add that nuance to this slide because otherwise it could be a little misleading.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, and if you watched, I think the Dr. Duran, the APS superintendent, kind of explained this in the beginning of the discussion at the school board meeting, and I think that his discussion and the board discussion around it was really helpful and also really relevant to us at JFAC, because he was talking about the 25 million bond issuance. So can we go down one slide, please, Matt? Yeah, you can't really see it, but so this is the funding scenario from the last from the FY 2023 CIP, which was passed a year and a half ago in June of 2022, and it and as you can see, there are maybe you could make it a little bit bigger, Matt. There are $25 million placeholders given from FY 2026 or 2026 through 2032. And that, and, you know, I think when we gave our recommendations in September, you know, one of the things that we were saying was that we are concerned for the financial outlook because, you know, because of higher interest rates, because of the high commercial vacancy rate, because and because the county also has new obligations, you know, new funding, new and ongoing funding obligations that they also have to, and the county also, and the county also has their own capital improvement plan that, and APS and the county share their bonding issuance and bond votes, and it has to remain under 10% of the total budget in order for APS to keep their AAA bond rating. So, Dr. Duran was explaining that these $25 million placeholders, which were put there in the last CIP, and we won't go too deep in the weeds about why they're there, but they are there. And so in this CIP, APS is being that's sort of the boundary in which they are, from what I understand, the Dr. Duran's explanation at the school board was that it can change. It's not going to change. You know, he said maybe we could get $40 million from the county, but in order to get that extra money from the county, the APS has to define a need and a priority and make a case for why this needs to have, you know, why we need to have that money for that year. So it goes back to that needs and priorities need to be clearly defined and articulated. And one of the things that I've always, you know, that's been driven home for me by a former JFAC chair, Ginger Brown, was that it, you know, there needs to be clear communication between the county and APS. And in order for an APS project to be seen as, you know, as to be acknowledged, it has to be in a plan. So if you want APS to start planning for project X, you have to put it in a CIP because that's the way that it gets acknowledged by the county board. So, and you know, I found the school board discussion between the about this sort of trade-off with the county is that the county has other needs too, like, you know, so they may need to take some of, we might not get all of the 25 million one year because the county may need, for example, a fire station, and that has to take some bonding capacity. So there's going to be a give and take, but you know, the real picture is that the budget situation this time is tight, probably tighter. It is, this is about what we're looking at. And, you know, I've been a part of facilities advisory commissions, either the FAC or JFAC since the FY 2014 CIP. So I've seen a couple of them go around, and this is the first time I've actually seen like a flat amount of money. You know, usually there's more money shows up in the next time, but this time around, we're pretty much expecting about the same amount of bonding capacity to work with. So does anybody have any questions about that, or want to add anything that they watched from the school board meeting that they found relevant to share? Natalie, did you have your hand
Well,
up?
no, I was just going to ask you. So based on what you were just saying, you think this is one of the worst budget situations that you've seen, or it's about the low? I mean, is that what you're basically opining on? I'm sorry?
It's about what I expected. It's a pretty tight budget.
Right.
I mean, sort of given the low commercial vacancy rate, I also understand that not only is, you know, the commercial vacancy rate is high, but assessments for commercial properties have also come in lower.
Yeah.
Which means the county is bringing in less money for commercial buildings, and so that just makes the overall budget tighter, and that also makes the operating budget tighter, which then, you know, if you take out a bond, you know, if you borrow money in bonds, it's like taking out a mortgage. So you have to pay, you know, so what you're paying in debt service comes out of our operating budget, and that's a lot of money.
Right. Got it. Thanks.
Andy?
Hey, thanks, Stacey. No, I think you're right. You know, I don't have as much experience as you do, but it is interesting that the budget stayed flat, and you know, and I recognize, I know that there's a lot of headwinds for commercial properties, but since our county is predominantly residential, and as someone who's been here for a few years, I haven't seen my tax bill go down. I'm hoping that the resident rates are able to kind of keep up or catch to help at least alleviate our budget situation, but I haven't heard anything on that. Also, as we are the Joint Facilities Advisory Committee, I was wondering what other projects the county has. We seem to be, being a second review of whatever the Facilities Advisory Committee for APS has been doing, which is great. But I also, you know, I don't want us to lose the context of what other priorities are going on. Like you mentioned, fire stations or libraries or, you know, whatever it is that is going on in the county budget. You know, I do also know that, you know, APS is the big gorilla in the room with, I think, 70 to 80% of the budget. So certainly warranted we spend this time there. But I didn't know if there's a balance there or other things, priorities that we need to talk about as it relates to the SIP when we start thinking about trying to say, hey, let's look at the overall budget and this part of it and what we can and can't do with as it relates to APS and other county priorities. Thanks.
You're on mute, I think. Or I couldn't hear
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Claire.
Sure.
As far as I know, the county, and Matt Ladd, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, the county has not done a CIP direction yet. I can say from the last CIP that there were a lot of needs defined by the county, and in fact, their needs, I almost included that the funding scenario from the counties, from the county board CIP in this presentation, but I left it out. But in the last CIP, the county board had pushed even to the out years, they were up to about 9.8% of their debt capacity limit. Mostly because, as I understand it, like during COVID, a lot of projects got pushed back. And so there was a lot of delay, but the county funds, roads and sidewalks and, a lot of, they, and that's even without a big, like the new county pool or a county, a community center renovation. Those are, really what was driving the, what was, the projects in the CIP from the county in the last CIP were very well defined and were mostly about basic maintenance from my perspective. I do see some joint planning in the CIP direction from the county, and I hope that we may have an opportunity to review the county CIP direction when it comes out. But my understanding from a conversation with the county board member is that they aren't doing it till the beginning of the year. Is that correct, Matt?
So I may have this wrong, and I'm may have to go back and correct this if I am wrong. But my understanding of the process and the way that it's been done in the past is that, it's obviously APS and the county have their separate CIP processes, in terms of how they roll things out and do public engagement. And the school board traditionally has done CIP guidance, which is what you're reacting to right now. I don't think the county board has typically given the county manager guidance in advance of the CIP.
Okay.
They do give budget guidance in advance of doing the operating budget.
Okay.
So that's, that's why you've been reviewing the pre-CIP, which is a step that APS takes,
Right.
and the CIP direction, which is a step that the school board
Right.
takes.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Matt, for that clarification. Claire, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a few kind of responses, I guess, to some of the points Andy brought up. The balance between residential and commercial sectors has kind of hovered, around 50%, and sometimes commercial would be a little bit more, maybe 55% of the total revenues. But it has unfortunately already dropped quite a bit. And I think the most recent trend is that residential is funding maybe close to 55%. And so when you get even further reductions in the commercial funding, people do either sit up and take notice, or the budget has to be cut, right? So that was just a response on that. In terms of the overall pie, schools get, maybe is it like 43 to 46% of the local funding. So it's not a 70-30 split. It's a little bit closer to 45. And then one last thing, I don't know, Matt, if you know, but the county is planning major upgrades to the wastewater treatment facility. And Matt, I don't know if you are aware of how that is funded, if it's funded through separate, I should probably know, separate streams or general, and if bonds, anything you could provide. But that's, I know, a major county endeavor, along with possible electrification investments. So those could also take place over the next 10 years. But Matt, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, so I don't off the top of my head know exactly the revenue source, whether it's obligation bonds or whether it's some other revenue stream. But those improvements to the wastewater treatment plant have been, in process for many, many years, and so they are in the current CIP. So that information is available, and JFAC reviewed the last CIP, so you can look at that for more information. And I also wanted to mention, since there's been a lot of discussion about commercial vacancies and the sort of fiscal impacts of that, There was a county board work session on October 10th where they talked about commercial market resiliency, and there were some presentations in there that that went in pretty great detail on the situation that we're facing in terms of commercial vacancies. So I think that's a good resource, and I can try to find the link to that meeting and put it in the chat.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Sorry, I knew it was a large percentage. I apologize for overstating. I didn't, but I can't see the raise my hand again. But thank you for the clarification.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next slide, Matt. Okay, so what is included in the CIP direction for continuing projects? Again, this is a slide from the presentation. Is, these were funded or outlined in the 2023 in the last CIP. And the superintendent is recommending that they continue, and that is major infrastructure projects. So that's annual funding, kitchen and security vestibule renovations in the schools, synthetic turf projects. So that's field conversion, and sometimes those are joint projects with the county, the Career Center campus project, and the enterprise resource planning system modernization. And then for new projects, can we go to the next slide, please, Matt? For new projects to include in this year's CIP, in addition to the ones from the last CIP, would be, right now it says the long range plan to renovate existing facilities, feasibility studies, major infrastructure projects, synthetic turf projects, the trade center optimization study, and future phases of the Career Center campus. So in the last slide, what was approved and is definitely going forward on the Career Center campus is the new building, the garage, and a field. And then so the future phases of the Career Center campus are to be included in this CIP direction. Just so you know, I'm opening the links that Matt is sharing here, and I will send them in an email tomorrow. Okay, so the next slide, please. So I kind of am just breaking down into different sections. For our discussion, there's budget, there's the long range plan to renovate existing facilities. There is the trade center and the career center, and then we'll have some final recommendations overall at the end. So
question for you.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't see to raise my hand. You said that on the last slide there was several things that were already approved, including the green space. Wouldn't that also mean it's approved to relocate MPSA out of the current facility?
There is another smaller field on the site, Rob, that was approved. Don't think I have that slide in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. I mean, they did
Yeah.
build a new green space in it because they're tearing down another one. I was just curious if you're referring to the green space that is also part of the project that was approved where the current facility exists, if that's what you're referring to, or something else.
Oops, sorry. Me. I was like, what is, I had opened up one of the things that Matt had shared, and it was playing. Um, sorry about that. Yeah, so I think that there is still that the demolition. I mean, I think, yes, it has been decided that that Montessori, the MPSA will be relocated and that green space will be created.
Yeah.
But I think what was approved in the last CIP was a smaller green space closer to the existing Legacy Career Center building and the garage and the new building. And
Yeah,
and the
right. They're tearing down a playground that was part of the Patrick Henry facility before it was MPSA in order to make space for the Arlington Tech building that's being created. And
Okay.
that, I believe the verbiage from the last SIP did state that MPSA would move into the Career Center building. And that's what those placeholders are for. And those are, like you said earlier, placeholders only.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay. So on the and we do have the Career Center future phases, what has been recommended as another topic. So but right now, so this is the draft recommendations for the feedback, kind of just on the budget. You know, they're just kind of bullet points here. Does anyone have anything to add to this? Any changes to the language, anything clarifying? I do think that there is a knowledge of the, go back to one of the guiding questions, does it respond to budget parameters? I feel like it does, because there's some pretty clear parameters, but I also think it also creates a Claire, I will let you chime in here.
Oh, okay. I was just going to suggest that we may want to acknowledge more than one possible outcome with respect to the amount of money. So in the second bullet point, it says, acknowledge priorities and defining needs, because, and then you give one scenario, if APS needs more money from the county than the $25 million. There's a lot of possible scenarios right now. One option could be if APS needs more money, but the county is unable to provide it, or I mean, the overall pie could shrink such that even if the county gives more than what it expects or puts its own projects on hold, it still may not be more than $25 million that the school gets. I don't know if you're looking to add that nuance in this slide, but I don't. I want to just acknowledge that there are multiple possibilities, because I did watch Dr. Duran's presentation, and the way it sounded to me, it was kind of like, oh, well, we could get 25 million or we could get 50 million. It didn't acknowledge that you could get 8 million. So,
Well,
just wanting to sort of make sure that people are aware that it could go in multiple directions for multiple reasons.
Yeah, I mean, from what I remember, Dr. Duran did say that there was a possibility that it might be less than 25 million if the county, had a defined need and they couldn't, but I do think it kind of creates an opportunity, and all of this will become more clear once there is, a defined budget, which doesn't happen until March or April, which is kind of late. But I do think that you're right in sort of pointing out that it could go either way. Like APS could get a little bit more money, but they could also end up getting a lot less. So I think in any case, what's going to happen is that it's going to have to we're just going to have to be very careful, and we're going to have to make sure that they are communicating and that trade-offs are understood and that needs and priorities are clearly defined. I think that that's a big, why do you need to, and I think there's a lot of information, there's a lot of helpful information that APS has at the moment, like this new report that defines like, a school needs a new roof because it has a red rating and it has 2 years of remaining useful life. So I think some of the needs will be clearly, will already be clearly defined, but others may need to be prioritized by the board. And it's in a tight budget situation, you have to sort of weigh all of these, you have to weigh all the needs and, okay, what are we going to spend money on? And is there a way that we can save money on this project so we have a little bit more on the other one? And I think all of those are going to be really important.
Would you be open to adding after guideline something like, or receives less than this amount, comma?
Sure.
Okay, just to kind of make sure that people who read this understand that the 25 million is not a floor.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay. Okay.
Also, when it comes to these projects and priorities, and we also need to make sure that we don't keep investing. I think that you're right, says that report has a lot of great information in it, and it kind of showed that there's been systematic repeated systematic problems with various facilities, not limited to any one, like a lot of the facilities where we replace something and then we can see that the life cycle of system 2 or 3 or roof or whatever, like these major infrastructure things, that if we piecemeal together a small, if we start getting cut by 1,000 paper cuts, it's can be worse than funding one thing too. Like we have a lot of schools that need a lot of prioritizing the school or facilities, I should say, that have many repeated or many things coming up, and not in addition to already in the red. Does it make sense to invest in that structure over something else that could be funded? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Are we ready to move on? Okay, let's go to the next subject. So the long range plan that was a good segue, Andy. So the report, I think that some of you went to the informational meeting, or I hope some of you watched the about the long range renovation, the facility condition assessment report on November, when was that? It's October the 30th, where Wells did such a great job sitting in and representing JFAC. But the facilities long-range renovation plan is a system-wide assessment of facilities. It gives detailed information about each school, major building systems, educational spaces, and common spaces. And it's a comprehensive data to inform current and future capital enrollment plans. And this is a slide from the school board meeting. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? I wanted to include this one. This one was from the committee of the whole meeting, and I think they also included it in our informational meeting. But it just breaks down the 3 projects into these 3 categories, which will be funded in which are looking for funding in this CIP direction. So there are local projects, there are capital needs, and those are, APS has a fairly robust minor MCMM, which means minor construction, major maintenance, and system that they are, try to stay on top of projects. But those are, kind of, fix a leaky toilet, or, kind of localized projects, or they, replace a floor in a gym. Kind of their disruption is minimal, and it doesn't really disrupt schools. Someone has their hand up, but I can't. Brian.
That's Brian. It was about the previous slide when you're ready.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to make sure I understand the long-range renovation plan. So 2 questions. One is this the plan that's identified to have a tier 2 element coming along on it? And then the second one is this the plan that's identified to cost $68 million, I think, in the CIP and the spreadsheet slide?
So we are in phase 2. So phase 1 of the report, we had a joint meeting with FAC in March, I think, and they presented us a kind of initial, they did a kind of a pilot study with 4 schools to make sure that they were kind of looking at the right things and categorizing the right criteria. And then phase 2 was to do all of the schools, and that's what we waited for. And so that we are in phase 2, and there was a placeholder for 68 million in the FY23 CIP, and that was a number that was put there based on the 25 million placeholder, and not necessarily tied to any one project. It's just kind of, it's a placeholder, and my understanding is that and if you read the new projects under the long range renovation plan that are under this proposed CIP direction, they are proposing that can we go back to the next slide, please, Matt? They are proposing that we fund the local projects, which money is already kind of in there. If you look at the top line of the FY23 budget, there a lot of them are already funded, and then up to 5 major infrastructure projects, and those are like a new roof or an HVAC system, and those will cost, it's a sort of a 1 to 3 year. They're sort of medium disruption to students. Most of the work can be done over a school year. The way that I am reading the capital, if you just read word for this presentation, the deep dive studies or a major infrastructure project, a major renovation project, the deep dive studies, which will cost more than 50, and that's like their APS is proposing that they do 3 to 5 deep dive studies, and then 1 major renovation project. And that would be like a school rebuild or a major renovation, and those would be to are more for the schools that have so many, kind of notable and like educational space inadequacies that it can't be a remedy for those problems can't be addressed with just a new roof, or an HVAC system. It would be like it kind of needs a major rehaul, and that is And that's what the deep dive studies will look into, to sort of point out like, okay, we're going to look at 3 schools and they're going to come up with different, I'm just using an example. I see your hand up, Natalie. I'll get to you. It can be a renovation, or it may actually make more sense to rebuild the school, and it may or may not need swing space. And what I am proposing that we suggest to the CIP direction is that there be there be an articulated priority that planning starts for one of those major renovations in this CIP. Natalie.
Actually, you just answered my question, but actually I was going to just interject that, like, for a deep dive would be something like Jefferson Middle School, to rebuild that. I mean, that would be something like that, where it had a host of things that are right? Is that correct? All right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here's what the superintendent's proposed CIP will include: a review of alignment of local projects with minor construction, major maintenance, 10-year project list based on remaining useful life and identified associated costs, a list of projects for inclusion along with estimated costs in alignment with bonding capacity under major infrastructure. So that would be a new roof, a new HVAC system, something that would be less than $15 million and kind of, something like a high need, that could be done within 1 to 3 years. And then a list of 3 to 5 facilities for feasibility studies. And the feasibility studies will include a full scope and analysis of appropriate options for renovation and or replacement, estimated cost and or replacement option per facility, and consideration for phasing or swing space if needed. Natalie, do you still have your hand up from before, or do you have another question?
No, that's from before. Sorry.
Okay, it's okay. So does anybody have any, Wells, do you have anything to add in here?
Thanks, Stacey. Nothing else to add so far.
Okay.
But just sensitive to Natalie's question. So one of the things that Stacey and I have been talking about, especially going into and out of the joint information session with the APS staff, JFAC and FAC, was that there are a few schools that particularly caught our attention. Looking over the list of schools that kind of made the cut for being the highest priorities for design studies. And so that's why both Stacey and I felt that it was important to, recommend to APS that as part of this CIP to go ahead and lay the groundwork for doing, a major renovation project, depending on the results of the design studies that we can talk about more in a minute, sooner rather than later. Obviously needing to balance other priorities along with consideration of the bonding capacity limits, but it's at least good to start thinking now about how soon we could start a major renovation project, especially if one or more of those design studies comes back and says, well, look, we need to tear down and rebuild here, and here are some potential options for you.
Thank you, Wells. Brian, I see your hand up. If you're trying to talk, Brian, you're muted.
So sorry. Just following up. It's so hard. I just can't manage both a raising of hand and unmuting. It's way beyond my capabilities. The 3 to 5, the recommendation for 3 to 5, does that cover the need, or is this 3 to 5 out of what you feel like are 10 meritorious projects? How did we come up with 3 to 5 as the recommendation?
That's a good question.
Stacey,
I mean,
I'm
that
happy
is
to take that one, unless
yeah, go ahead, Wells.
you'd like to. Sure. So one of the things that we talked about at that information session was that there's a difference in how APS came up with the priority list for major infrastructure on one hand and the major renovation potential projects on the other that are eligible for the design studies. Major infrastructure is basically based on just how, you know, the building is aging and performing now by its individual components. So looking at roofs, HVAC systems, and the like. And so they kind of created a list of, you know, kind of high priority schools there that are more in the category of like fixer-uppers, you know, things where if it's a roof, HVAC system, or the like, something that is discrete that can be fixed without a lot of disruption. For the design studies, the criteria is more about educational space needs. So less, you know, is the, you know, how are the life cycles of the different elements of the building matching up? Are they performing like they need to be? It's more like, is the space configured in a way that matches the educational purpose of the school and its programs? And so that's where there's been, I think, you know, they're thinking about it differently, because on the one hand, with a major infrastructure project, you know, if you sort of fix the problem, you have fixed the problem. It's more discrete. Whereas, you know, if you're talking about classrooms that are too small or don't have enough light or ventilation, those are going to be increasingly difficult to do, you know, that kind of spot infrastructure work on without something akin to or constituting a down to the studs renovation or even a total tear down. So that's how they came up with the list of the design studies, is looking at the schools that had the biggest mismatch between their kind of educational program needs and the building form itself.
And that list is of 3 to 5. That covers everything that falls within that category.
Well, the number is, you know, the number that they used at the committee of the whole meeting was 5 to 10. And, you know, there has been some back and forth, and in our feedback for methodology, we did kind of ask, and it is a question that I ask in our draft recommended guidelines too, is 3 to 5 facility feasibility studies the right number for this CIP direction? Because if you think that a major renovation project can only happen, you know, it takes 3 to 5 years to build a new school or do a major addition to a school, which one of these feasibility studies would do. You know, kind of doing more feasibility studies, you know, one of the examples we use, so that the 10 schools that they gave at the committee of the whole meeting, and these were in order of their priority using the methodology that the school board had given them, but it's not yet been completely approved. But it was TJ Middle School, MPSA, Barrett, Taylor, Swanson, Jamestown, Oak Ridge, Claremont, Hoffman, Boston, Williamsburg Middle School. And if you think that it takes between 3 to 5 years to do a major renovation or build a new school, to get to the 10th school, you know, to get to all 10 schools, if you had enough money, that would be 30 to 50 years, over which time things will change, enrollment projections change, money changes, you know, kind of there. Yeah, imagine how different, you know, Arlington will look in 30 years. And so it just makes you question, like, really how, you know, to me, you know, personally, I think 2 to 3 makes more sense, especially because it's not clear there may be enough money to do a major renovation in this CIP timeframe and do the major infrastructure projects like the roof and the HVAC system and the local projects and fund the trade center and, you know, the trade center feasibility studies and, you know, all, you know, the other priorities that I support as well. and finish the Career Center. I think there's only really one that's possible in this time frame. So I think doing 2 to 3 makes more sense. That's my argument for the number. And Claire, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I agree. 2 to 3 is more practical in terms of what will be useful. We do have to also realize, these are elected officials. They don't, it feels better to include a wider variety to give more schools hope, right? And to say, oh, well, you might, and we're going to do a feasibility study for your school. So, we have to acknowledge the political realities, but the financial realities and the timing realities would point to 2 to 3. I also want to highlight that construction and the CIP is not the only solution to educational space deficiencies. And this is something that we really need to grapple with. We've been coming out of an era where, supply closets were sort of cobbled together and turned into classrooms. And surprise, that classroom is too small to meet our ed specs. But at the same time, we're looking at lowering enrollment, at the end of over the next 10 years, projected, of course. And so we really have to ask ourselves, do we need to turn every X supply closet into a 1,050 square foot adequate educational space and then close schools because we don't have enough students enrolled? Or sometimes, a supply closet is just a supply closet, and we need to think about other approaches to matching our programs and evaluating our space, other than just major build outs and capital investments. So I think we could maybe use the 2 to 3 as a constraint to encourage creative thinking and creative problem solving where we can, with some of these other tools, including really aligning space with the program needs, with the enrollment projections, all of that, rather than just saying, oh, it looks like right now, some spaces need to be maximized. So yeah, I would be supportive of 2 to 3. Thanks.
Thank you. Andy, your hand is up.
Thanks. Yeah, I had to switch devices. Sorry for the issues. No, I think Claire's got some really good points as well. And what you said, Stacey, it's interesting that there's 10 schools on there and that there's a lot of need for facility renovations. I feel like, the timelines are going to change. The enrollment projections are going to change. If we are seeing under enrollment at schools, like that should be a factor in what schools get issues. I know many of those schools on the list are have wait lists or are at capacity or have trailers. So it's, maybe there needs to be a part of this, a look at rezoning, as far as, we all love walkability, myself included. But maybe some of the planning factors for where we draw can maybe look at the issues of supporting facilities that are underutilized. Like Claire said, like let's think of creative ways to move the money around and not just keep like all the facilities exist. Let's keep them as they are. Maybe there's a way to be more efficient with how we approach this future SIP. Thanks.
Right. One of the things that we did recommend in methodology feedback was to, in the deep dive studies, that operational changes such as, moving a pre-K from one school to another, or, if there are, specific programs within a school, like, programs within a neighborhood school that could be moved out, or redefining capacity, like the capacity of our schools is kind of given when it's built or renovated, but that can be, that could be adjusted. And so sometimes there's operational changes like boundary changes and little program moves and those kinds of things. And so I do think that the deep dive studies, may be able to, for a school like Barrett that has a lot of, classrooms that are smaller than, educational specifications. If you look at the report, but the rest of the school is pretty okay. Something like operational changes or making, kind of doing some boundary changes to make the capacity of that school smaller may be a good short-term solution for a school like that. So I do, maybe that's something that we can add. Can we go down to the next slide? I'm mindful of time and I don't want us to run too far over. The last question, does anyone have any disagreement to changing to sort of recommending that APS look to 2 to 3 deep dive studies instead of 3 to 5?
Could we explain a little bit why?
Yeah. Yes. And explain why.
Yeah, I think 3 is a good number. But yeah, whatever. I don't think that's a big deal.
Yeah, no more than 3. Okay, do we agree that the facilities condition assessment is a valuable tool to help establish priorities and define needs? Do everybody support the recommendation to fund local projects and major infrastructure projects?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. This is the one that I personally feel, I feel like the CIP direction is very solid, and it's relatively minor, but the one thing that I would like to recommend, that I would like JFAC to recommend, is that include language to the CIP direction that designates a major renovation project as a priority beyond the feasibility studies, and include a TBD placeholder for a major infrastructure project as part of project planning. Anyone have any questions about that or disagree with that?
Is renovation and infrastructure intended to be different?
Yes, that in the 3 bucket slide that was 2 slides back.
Oh, okay.
The major infrastructure project is the roof, the HVAC.
The middle, and renovation is the deep dive. Okay,
Yeah, the
Got it.
renovation is the follow-up of a deep dive. Star.
Yeah, so I just have one question. In one of the presentations or documents that I was reading, it said something about it, or maybe it's something that you sent me, that the projects can't, like, one has to be finished before the other one begins. And then it also referenced the deep dive. So my question was, does a project have to be completed before another deep dive can be done, or is this something that can be done simultaneously?
They could be done simultaneously if there's enough money, I think, but kind of given limitations of bond funding availability, and it doesn't come in one big chunk, it's available over years, as you can see in the funding chart. And so it's really the funding availability that limits how many could be done at the same time. And the deep dive studies could all be done at the same time. And the local projects and the major infrastructure projects could probably be funded in the same years. And I think it's possible that at least planning for a major renovation project post the deep dive studies, and after it comes out of different scenarios of whether it's a rebuild or an addition or what makes sense. It may or may not have money for it in this CIP, but I think it needs to be the way that you define that as a priority. Like, so we do these deep dive studies this year, but the way that you define it as a priority is to put it as a placeholder in the years somewhere. And maybe that funding, sorry, my dog is about to bark. Maybe that funding can happen in year 6. Maybe it will have to wait until year 9 or 10 or even 11, as APS has done in years past. But I would really, I do think that's a really, it should be a priority, and I go into more explanation about why in the later ones. But I just sort of put that in here because that was part of the major renovation project. Okay, does anybody have any other questions? Did that answer your question?
That did. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, let's move on, and we could come back to that at the end. Okay, Trade Center. So in this CIP is a surprise to me. In collaboration with the county's Department of Environmental Services, in collaboration with APS, propose a trade center operational space feasibility study that includes APS bus electrification, and they will determine a long-term path forward for core functions at the trade center to support the county and APS, plan for decarbonization of school buses and other support vehicles, and identify opportunities for improvements for future actions for county and APS operation safety at the trade center. So let's go down to the next slide. And the recommendation for the CIP direction is that it will include funding for the a feasibility study that includes a plan for bus fleet electrification. And this is I'm curious to see what the county side will do, but I know that they're, from the conversation and hearing from Assistant Superintendent Renee Harbor that they're working closely with the county on this. Next slide, please. And so draft recommendations, feedback that we support this. Anybody not support this? Claire.
Well, let me just add some nuance. It's not that I don't support it,
Okay.
but so there was recently a report presented of the ART bus electrification sort of feasibility study on the county side. And that study did introduce the idea of hydrogen buses as a part of a pilot. So they did look into piloting battery buses in the ART bus fleet, but they also said that they wanted to consider piloting hydrogen buses. And the APS side didn't really mention that. So already it's a little bit of a red flag for me that, are they working in conjunction with one another? Does this try to make a statement in contrast to what the county is doing with piloting hydrogen? I think hydrogen is an expensive option for a 26 square mile area because we don't need as much range issues. We don't have as many range issues. But I'm just saying that, like, wow, we're already seeing a divergence here from the beginning between what schools and the county are saying about their intentions. So as JFAC, maybe we want to formulate some kind of heads up, we notice there's a divergence. Let's make sure that planning is done in an intentional, coordinated way going forward. To the extent anyone wants to lean one way or the other, I do think because we are such a small, compact county, battery buses should suffice. But if we don't want to weigh into that, that's fine. But I just wanted to flag that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Steve.
So I hope it's appropriate to bring this up now, Stacy, but first of all, I think it's great that APS is, explicitly talking about coordinating with the county and looking at Trade Center. I don't think we've heard anything from the county side about what their plans for Trade Center are. And I really feel that JFAC should get a briefing soon about, kind of what's the county side thinking here. If we're going to look at facility needs of both the county and APS, we kind of need a complete picture that I don't think we have right now. And this is not a surprise. I mean, this has been sort of rumbling for years now. And there was an effort, I think just before the pandemic, there was sort of an initial study. I'm not sure what came out of that initial study, but you have the final bullet point here, which I think is great. There are impacts on other locations as well. So this kind of has JFAC written all over it. And I feel that we need to be briefed on this soon. My other comment is just I'm supportive of this. It's an important element, but it's sort of a relatively micro aspect of optimizing this space that they're just talking about the electrification issue right now on the APS side. And it's almost like they should be talking about a feasibility study about what they could do with space optimization in terms of their space utilization in Trade Center, and I'm not seeing that here right now. So that's kind of my input or feedback. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Natalie.
Quickly, I was just going to say I agree with Claire. I actually would specifically add hydrogen in. I mean, I would just do exactly what the county's doing. And I would say something like, we noticed this and we think it's important. And I do think it's worth looking into that, even with a small county, and looking to see what makes sense. But, basically aligning us with the county on this, on electrification and on hydrogen.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I agree that I see this. Can you go back one slide, Matt, just so we can look at what, one more, please. Thank you. I remember watching the CIP presentation from the county manager during the last CIP process, and there were questions about the Trade Center, and he specifically said, well, we need APS to come to the table with us about Trade Center planning before we can start talking about it. So I do feel like this is a step in the right direction. And if there is any kind of language that, can we go back to our, that we can add in our recommendations or feedback that, that suggests, alignment with the county on what their, long range plans for, the importance of alignment with the county of, for their long range planning.
Or just being intentional, because I know hydrogen buses are like maybe 2.5 times more expensive than battery buses. So this may be a difference that's intentional. We just want to maybe highlight it at this point and just say, like, we note there's a divergence, and if it's an intentional divergence, let's talk about it. Let's understand what's driving that divergence. It really could be very intentional, but we want to just make sure it's not accidental, I think.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Shall we move on? Okay, future phases of the Career Center. Okay, next slide, please. So the recommended CIP direction for the future phases of the Career Center from, and this is also from the school board meeting presentation, and if you, it was also discussed about, there are a couple of questions about it by the school board members at the meeting, but they are recommending that the FY 2025 CIP include funding for the educational specification design, community engagement, use permit modification, and construction of a phased project that will include the relocation of MPSA program. It will also identify the reuse of the Legacy Career Center building, and demolish the current MPSA facility after program relocation and complete the campus with green space. This recommendation also maintains the student limit number on the site, and also includes kind of completing the new building and the garage and the small field that is not where the Montessori, not where the demolition of the green space that the Montessori facility will recreate. So let's go down to Natalie. Do you still have your hand up? No. Okay, let's go down to the next slide. So this is the draft recommendations feedback. That if you go back to our guidelines, that we support this CIP direction. We feel that the relocation of MPSA and the reuse of the Legacy Career Center should be determined through a public process that considers the context of other needs, timing, available funding, enrollment projections, and planning for long-range site and facility use, that it's balanced with fiscal constraints, that it is considerate of enrollment projections and overall operational efficiencies, balanced with other priorities such as a major renovation for timing and funding, and aligns with APS instructional visioning and planning processes. Anybody have any comments? Claire.
Quick question. A public process could mean two different things. One thing it could mean is just, public notification and awareness. Another one could be public input. I think there might have been an intent for public input here, but if we don't say that, it could not be taken that way.
I did ask APS staff some clarification questions about that, about the public process. Let me find the answers. I asked, the slide specifies recommending funding for community engagement. So this is my question, along with other planning, do you have a proposed timeline for when that community engagement will occur? And do you have a process in mind for this engagement? And the answer was, slide 19 recommends the school board include funding that allows for community engagement for the future use of the Legacy Career Center building. The process has not been determined yet.
Could we say public engagement process then? That just makes it clearer.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay. Andy.
Hey, question regarding the previous Career Center development plans, the BLPC, all the things that went into the current visioning for that site. I know that the community around the area, not specific to any program or APS, but like the neighborhoods, were very adamant about only having 2 programs in addition to the space thing. So I guess my first question is, was that part of it? Because we talked about the number of students and the constraints on the site, it being like 12 acres or whatever, then only having 2 programs. And one of the feedback things or compromises when the previous SIP was created was to one, to have that green space where the MPSA building currently exists, and 2, to limit the number of programs or schools on the site. Are we asking that the county revisit what the BLPC and other outreach efforts came to a conclusion on in previous years? And then my final question, I guess, is I like what we're saying about the enrollment projections, as both Arlington and PSA have wait lists if those 2 programs were to remain there. But I think if we start talking about other priorities, we may be undermining some of those other efforts and the future public engagement that I think Claire is absolutely right on, calling it engagement, not input.
All of those things that you asked about, like the cap, the planning, the BLPC for the new building, the garage, all of those things are decided. What the superintendent recommended, and this is not what we're recommending. We're offering feedback on the superintendent's recommendation. Could you go back one slide, please? Is that all of, like the new building, and so what this direction does is just create a process for the relocation of the MIPSA program or the MPSA program, and it will identify the reuse of the Legacy Career Center building, keeping in mind keeping that limit of number that was given the use permit, in mind. So all of that will be, so we are not recommending that they rethink that, or that there be 3 programs on the site. What we are looking at right now in this feedback is, do we support this process? Do we support a community engagement process that examines the relocation of MPSA and identify the reuse of the Legacy Career Center building that will then demolish that will lead to the demolition of the Montessori facility program and complete the campus with green space. And I am proposing that we support this process.
Sure. I just want to clarify, this slide we're looking at right now is from APS, not anything we created. So it
right.
separate relocating MPSA and reuse of Career Center, which
right.
my previous understanding were the same thing. Okay, that's good. Thank you. We can go back to the other slide.
Right, but I from my understanding, the relocation of MPSA and the reuse of the Legacy Career Center are not the same thing, or not. They may be the same thing, but they could also be something else.
Because the SIP from the previous SIP has money allocated for it already. Like that's
it had a placeholder
correct.
For it,
right.
And all of those placeholders can change based on enrollment projections and available money and new projects that need to be identified. And so what I am saying is, and what the CIP, the recommendation for the CIP direction is saying, and what we are discussing about whether or not we support is, do we support this recommendation for the CIP direction. That creates funding, that determines the educational specification, the design, provides community engagement, and use permit modification and construction of a phased project that will include the relocation of the MPSA program and identify the reuse of the Legacy Career Center program and demolish MPSA. That does not say that MPSA can't go into the Legacy Career Center.
Gotcha.
But it does say that it will be examined based on other uses. I mean, but examined with, and what I'm suggesting
relocating MPSA
is that we look at it in context.
Yeah.
Of,
all three of those things are context. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Of other priorities and make sure it works with all the other priorities.
Well, this can we go to the slide where our recommendations are? Not this one. So I don't think we need to include all these bullet points. We could just say the sentence above there as the, that's kind of imply that we're going to have all these things factored in, with the fiscal and enrollment concerns. I think you balance it with other priorities, sure, aligns with APS and instructional visioning, sure, but we just like we said earlier, it could go up, it could go down. Like, of course, it's going to be balanced within fiscal strengths. Of course, enrollment projections are going to change, and they're not a static number, and it's not written in stone that this is what's happening. So my only suggestion is that we take those first two bullet points out for this slide.
Okay, the balance with fiscal constraints and consideration of enrollment projections and other overall operational efficiencies.
Because we have that. I mean, the second bullet point is captured with the third one. I mean, you could combine those if you like, but I think the fiscal constraints are unknown at this point. We know we probably are likely to have fiscal constraints and other competing priorities, but that's part of making the pudding is of course you're going to have these things. I don't know. I don't really have any strong feelings on it either way, but it feels like we know these things, like that's part of this process. I feel like it's stating the obvious a little bit.
Anyone else have thoughts?
And I'm not married to removing them. If everyone wants to keep them, that's fine with me too.
Okay.
But I think if the superintendent is saying we're looking at these three things as separate priorities, then absolutely, like we should support that effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can go through and, because there is the relocation of the public process, and there's a couple of things that we're repeating. And so I'm willing to kind of go in and make sure that we're not repeating things. But I do think sort of saying enrollment projections and overall operational efficiencies is important. Balance with fiscal constraints and balance with other priorities, and that I think we can go in and make sure that we're not repeating ourselves, but I do think those points are important, and I think it's important to I think based on especially on the guiding questions that we asked in the beginning, that it's kind of articulating our support for this using those guiding questions.
So, yeah, I think the balanced with fiscal constraints and competing priorities could be one bullet. Maybe make it that so instead of having two things that start out with balanced, might make it a little clearer.
I mean, we could even just say I mean, I don't think that when more or less what we're going to do is just kind of go through and, Wells and I are going to draft a letter using the major points, and we will just make sure that we're not repeating ourselves, or if that makes sense. And unless there's something that you would like for us to not.
No, it's fine. It's really, let's continue for the sake of, or I don't need to.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Okay. Next slide. So these are the recommendations and feedback on proposed CIP direction. So these are draft recommendations, feedback, and these are basically going in and answering the guiding questions. We feel it defines an affordable and timely solutions for all priorities, with the exception of a major renovation project that we are recommending be included as a TBD placeholder. It responds to budget command parameters. It demonstrates an acknowledgement of long-range planning and collaboration between APS and the county. It considers each project or proposal in context of other needs, timings, available funding, enrollment projections, and planning for long-range site and facility use. And it establishes a process by which trade-offs are transparently considered. Anybody have any?
I have a question about this.
Okay.
It sounds like we are not making any suggestions for anything that it doesn't already do, because we are saying, looks great. I'm not sure if I had that same takeaway from our previous hour and a half of conversation. So, I mean, how do we how do we distinguish between what we want the CIP to be and what it currently is?
I mean, this is really a direction. So it's kind of pointing the steering wheel in the direction of where the CIP will go. And
maybe then that top bullet needs to be massaged a little bit, because it makes it sound like everything already is this,
Okay. I'm all good for that. Yeah, I mean, I just kind of went through and, I do feel like this is and this is just me speaking. I do feel like this is a solid CIP direction. And, and I do sort of, in life, I have this philosophy of, praising the positive, pay as much attention to the positive as possible and as little attention to the negative as possible. And kind of learn that from a toddler that would throw tantrums. But it is, I do feel like supporting, I do feel like there is a lot in this CIP direction to support. And I think it points us in the direction that affordable and timely solutions, and maybe that's what we, and maybe that's how we massage that first, the bullet point, or that we talk about.
I was thinking the very top point. I mean, maybe we can just say JFAC supports and commends the aspects of this CIP direction that I just, in reading this, it makes it sound like it's perfect as it currently is. And while maybe that is true, I just, that's not consistent with what we just got finished talking about. So
yeah, I that's perfectly fine. And I did write that down, the aspects of this CIP direction that could create
the following.
Yeah, that could create the following. Anyone else? I mean, I do feel like if we have concerns like over, kind of the trade center, but I mean, does anybody have any major concerns about the CIP direction? Does anyone feel like it's, not, what they're recommending is I don't see anyone's hands raised. Okay. All right, so let's go down to the next slide. And I just want to talk a little bit more. Oh, Steve Young. Steve.
So, Stacy, I don't want to belabor this, and it's not quite exactly the question you just asked, but the one thing that really did bother me, and this pertains mostly to their framework, their evaluation framework that we looked at, but there seems to be no awareness of climate. And specifically, when I say that, I'm not talking about, sustainability type stuff. I'm talking about resilience in the face of changes that are already happening. And the most dramatic being more frequent and more severe extreme rainfall events with catastrophic type flooding like we've been seeing over the last 20 years. And I don't see any evidence that APS is factoring the changes that we're actually experiencing into their process. And I bring it up because we're talking about potentially very major financial impacts from some of these extreme events. So the rainfall is the most obvious one, but we're also seeing extreme heat issues, which could impact HVAC systems, for example. And we're seeing more severe storms that result in power cuts that can sometimes be, somewhat prolonged power interruptions. So I'm not sure what the best way to raise it is, but I would like to see us put some kind of a marker down that we think that APS should begin to factor climate, actual, this is happening. It doesn't matter what we do now. That we're going to be dealing with these changes for the foreseeable future. So I just wanted to bring that up. That's the one thing that really kind of bothers me that I see as missing. And I'm not saying it for hand waving. I'm saying it because it's real. In fact, the National Climate Assessment was just released, and I think it basically substantiates that as is happening now in our area. So
Can you think of a language that that specifically specifies that in regards to schools and public facilities planning?
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of key phrase is climate resilience, where you're talking about facilities that will be resilient to these climate impacts that are taking place.
Does anybody have any objections to including that as a point in the feedback?
No, not at all. In fact, it's critical. That's a really good point. Thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And I will include that as a bullet, as a point in the feedback. Okay.
Thanks, Stacy.
Yeah, you're welcome. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so this was the one suggestion that I have included for this CIP direction that I thought was missing, that was important for planning, and that was that the CIP direction designates a major renovation project as a priority beyond the feasibility studies, and to include a TBD placeholder for a major infrastructure project as part of project planning. And I think it is important because it is important to give notice to the county to also start planning. I mean, one of the school that APS gave at the top of the list and that if you look at the facilities assessment report, that that kind of comes to the top of needing a major renovation is Jefferson Middle School. And I mean, it will almost certainly be in the, I mean, we don't know for sure, but my guess is it will be part of the feasibility studies. And it is a, there's a county community center inside of the facility. And it is also surrounded by county land, even though the school itself sits on APS property. Everything else around it is owned by the county. So anything that's done to that facility will require collaborative planning with the county. And if it's a rebuild or a major renovation, the county will also have to start planning to provide money for that. There was a placeholder given for a long range plan to renovate existing facilities in the last CIP. But from what I understand, I think that placeholder money can also go to major infrastructure projects, and it's not necessarily for a major renovation. And I think it should be specified for a major renovation along with specification for major infrastructure. I think they both should, they should all be priorities. And then if it is given a placeholder, then other capital expenditures in this CIP will be balanced against it as a priority. If it's not listed as a placeholder in this, then there will be like, well, who needs to save money? You know, let's spend all the money we have, you know, on these priorities, and not allow planning money, or, you know, start to consider about leaving some money for this major renovation project. And then the facilities condition assessment report data shows that there are schools with notable educational space inadequacies that need more than a major infrastructure project can address. These schools need the assurance that finding a solution to their needs and educational space inadequacies demonstrated in the FCA is a priority. So, Claire.
Yeah, I think this is really important because it does help make things concrete, including just sequencing and making sure that, to your point, we don't end up spending all of our money and then realizing, oh, we didn't leave anything for this major project. So I think just to understand, in the previous CIP, there was a placeholder for long range renovation. I think what you're saying, and it may be helpful to make this a little bit more specific. Well, maybe not at this point because it's CIP direction, but the idea would be to have multiple placeholders, maybe one for major renovation, maybe one for major infrastructure. Is that kind of where you're getting at?
Yes, I mean, my the CIP direction says that they're looking at 5 major infrastructure projects within this CIP. And so, and those probably are, and those are more easily identified. There's like, you know, Key needs a new roof, that's already in the plans. I mean, there are, you know, so I think that those projects will actually be included as actual projects in this CIP. Whereas right now, as I read the CIP direction, they are saying that and maybe that they just need to adjust the language. Maybe they are planning to put a TBD for a major renovation project in this, you know, in this CIP. But I think that it suggests adding more clear language to the CIP direct. Maybe that's what it is, just adding more clear language to the CIP direction that that designates a major renovation project following the information and the feasibility studies. Because that's not clear to me in this CIP direction.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Wells?
Nothing for me.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we are close to the end of our meeting. I see we have a guest, or Bill. Zach, will you guys want to do a public comment? Okay. All right. So, oh, Zach.
Oh, I just want to give a quick update. Basically, what you guys discussed here is the same as what JFAC or FAC had discussed. We went into some more detail on the methodologies in the get to those deep dives and things. So that's what FAC is looking at now, and then we'll provide our input to staff so that they can start working on those studies.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Does everybody support more or less the major points that we've covered in the recommended feedback and language with the additions and the couple of language changes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, do we can we vote on them? Can I get a motion to call a vote to approve the recommended feedback with edits?
Yeah, I make that motion.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay,
Thank you,
supported.
Stacy and Wells. This was a lot of work. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all for your feedback. I appreciate it. I think our I know, I've heard back from staff the questions that we asked at the informational meeting about the facilities report, and a couple of questions have been they have been, and from the Renee Harbour said thank you for our feedback on the methodology that we sent in that I shared with you, so anyway, thank you for all of your work and input, and I think this I think this CIP direction is pointed in the right direction. So and thank you for all the discussion tonight, and wow, we finished right at 9 o'clock. So I really value your time and input. I know this is a volunteer committee, and thank you, Wells, for all your help. I know you've been swamped at work this week, so and thank you to Matt and Robert, who are a huge help behind the scenes. They do a lot of work. So, all right, well, I will share with you. Wells, do you have something to say?
I just wanted to reiterate my thanks to you, Stacy. You have really carried the laboring oar on this, and so just thank you for all the work and your leadership in guiding us through this. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, and so I will be sending a follow-up email with our newly adopted charge that we've been waiting for since February, and our and the links that Matt shared tonight on the can't even remember what that was. Oh, the commercial vacancy rate informational work session, and any other, and then Wells and I will put this together in a letter, and we'll share that with you as well. but that won't be for another couple days, probably. So, okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And we will be in touch. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Take care, all.
Good night.
Good night.